All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So I'm Andrew, aka Napoleon Mindgasms, for the purposes of this chat, and we've got two legs bad centrist here, of course, aka woke centrist, aka Dusty Cubes, aka Dustin Cubit, who we often talk with, and we are going to discuss George Orwell's famous book, Animal Farm, and which is basically George Orwell said himself basically that this was basically a direct critique of Stalinism, and it's obvious for anyone who's read it that it's about how a communist revolution leads to Stalinism and civil war, and that's a pretty well-known message nowadays, but it's just as George Orwell does, it's very very evocative and well written, and the metaphors for how humans behave that way and just kind of like inevitably corrupt any sort of authoritarian political system is very brilliantly executed, I would say. And I think I like 1984 slightly more than this, but this is definitely an awesome book too. I'm pretty sure I give them both 5 stars. So, but what are your thoughts about it in general, Dusty?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of an allegorical tale about one form of authoritarianism shifting into another form. Um, and in this case, I'm not sure if it's a critique on communism, so to speak, but you definitely see that. Um, I think it does have to do with communism, because if you think about the way the transition happened, it was a violent revolution, right? And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so I
and
think it's
I
critique,
think it was
might be a critique. Go ahead.
yeah, like you were just saying there. I think it's a critique of specifically communism and even more specifically Stalinism, because George Orwell himself called himself a democratic socialist. So it wasn't like a critique of all of socialism itself.
Right, that's definitely a brand of the violent revolutionary type, where it's almost like the promises that they have to make in order to overthrow the government in a violent and revolutionary way, in which you don't have all the people's consent,
Yeah,
can then
exactly.
again turn into the same thing, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's like one of the most chilling parts of the novel at the end, where when the pigs who are running the farm end up looking indistinguishable to the other animals from the humans who they overthrew in the first place, and that
Right.
basically ends up happening throughout. Like there's this utopia at first, and then there's civil war between the two factions. I think it's Snowball and Napoleon, and
Mm-hmm.
then things get worse, and then they just keep getting worse and worse and worse, and the original ideology flips totally on its head, like your this relates to your name there. Two legs bad. There was a proclamation at first: four legs good, two legs bad, and then it becomes four legs good, two legs better. And then I put a quote for part of the thumbnail of this video: all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, because it started off as all animals are equal, and then it changed to that by the end of the book.
Yeah, one of the interesting aspects of this story is that there's an idealism in a classless society, but then at the end of the road, that idealism shatters,
Yeah,
and they don't have a good way of actually solving that particular problem, because in the end, there is a class in society, that is the pigs. But we know that in the beginning, they were kind of promising this classless society, and there was a slow creep into the doctrine and how it had been changed over the years to make pigs more dominant over the other animals.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and you could say, like, if we're looking at it allegorically in terms of the Russian Revolution and that leading to Stalin, you can talk about how, being against the bourgeoisie or whatever turns into praising Stalin, and more increasing authoritarian practices, which are all supposedly done for the greater good, right?
Yeah, so we saw that during their inner turmoil and their inner struggles, they used um, measures that were extremely authoritarian, like what they did to Snowball. They had to use very nefarious means to get rid of Snowball.
Yep.
And when others started to speak out, they got, I think one of the notable instances is there was this horse who was responsible for a lot of the physical labor. And once he started to dissent and his health just failed a little, they sold him down the road to like a butcher.
Yeah, that's
But they
exactly the
had,
example I was just thinking of. Also, actually, and then they lied to everyone about it too, right?
right. So they lied and told him, oh, he's going to like some type of special doctor. And it's like the opposite of what was going on.
Yeah,
So they're
exactly.
definitely lying. I think also this as well, is I did see a couple of, I don't know if you want to consider it mild critiques of capitalism, but like selling somebody for money, um, selling out your principles for money. That definitely happened in this book, where they were selling out their principles so that they could sell their products to humans in another
Yeah,
form, or
exactly.
sell their
Yeah, they
labor to
started
humans.
doing business dealings with the humans who were the original enemies who they overthrew.
Right, and that's when they started backing out on some of their political and moral positions in order to do so, in order to maintain relationships with these people who were, supposed to be bad oppressors, but it was the dollar sign that kind of connected that made them go back on their principles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about the most general criticism of the book, I'd say it's a corruption, a criticism of corruption and the power of money, and how power and money can corrupt people. And the famous anachronism, power corrupts absolutely. And then also, like, part of the critique of Stalinism and communism is the authoritarianism of it, that aspect of it specifically. And the authoritarianism and corruption of of communism and Stalinism specifically. But then also, money corrupts people almost inevitably, and power corrupts people almost inevitably, regardless of, like, your political persuasion, pretty much. And yeah, so I mean, just being a slave to making money, you could say that is a minor critique of capitalism as well.
Right. One must think of what would happen had Snowball still been in the picture. I know Snowball was effectively used as a boogeyman once he was exiled, like secretly exiled from the group. But they would attribute all these bad things to him. And it kind of similar to when I think of nation states kind of pointing at enemy states and attributing all that is bad to them, whereas some of that bad is actually the responsibility of the accuser themselves.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, they always have scapegoats. Like Hitler blamed everything on the Jews. Stalin blamed everything on I don't know what he blame it on, capitalism in the Western world and that kind of stuff.
Right. Russia blames it. The current Russia blames everything in the West. Current America blames everything on wokeness. So
Yeah, that's true.
not even a
Yeah,
state, not even a state anymore. It's like some type of ideology that's the boogeyman now.
yep.
Um, so it's, but yeah, do we still have these kind of state conflicts? I don't think the state conflicts are as bad as they used to be. Now it's mainly attacks on particular ideologies and not particular states.
Yeah, I think probably part of that, part of that, or perhaps a large factor, is that people are more globally connected due to the internet and social media.
Yeah, and if you think of like Russia, the United States, I don't think morally or even, I think they share a lot in common actually. Um, and right now, it seems that Russia is more conservative than the United States is.
Yeah, I would say
Um,
so.
as far as social issues are concerned, um, I think they've kind of, for the most part, are operating on a more capitalistic system. Theirs is more oligarchical, much more oligarchical than the U.S. But their system isn't about everybody is equal and
No,
caring
yeah,
about the workers.
that was the lie of Stalinism and communism.
Right. And even then now there's like I wouldn't even consider them at all a socialist country. I think there's very few socialist countries that are still operating today.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think you're right. Like Russia today is more. It's still some type of a dictatorship, but more like an oligarchy, like you said. It's not a socialist state.
yeah, China is a bit more complicated.
That's kind
But I
of
do
seems like
see,
the it seems like capitalism and communism combined somehow.
yeah, we can see that, of course, China is becoming more corporate in its approach to generating revenue. Um, like they do have corporations. They're not completely free of the government, but the
Yeah, aren't
government
they
can,
controlled by the government somehow?
I wouldn't say controlled, I'd say answerable to. It'd be the
Okay.
equivalent of, say, um, like say Facebook, all right, say the government told Facebook, hey, we demand that you turn over the data for these particular individuals. Um, in order for the government to successfully do that, they would have to win a court case, and that would be tested against the Constitution. If that happened in China, there's no court case. They have to give it over to the Chinese government if if no ifs, ands, or buts. So there's no legal system barring China from forcing a Chinese company to give them something that they want. Also, I don't think people can own land. Um, well,
Oh,
I don't think a
really?
majority of people can own land.
Oh, okay.
So any land you have, you can own it on a lease, but you can't fully own it to pass down to your ancestors.
That's interesting that you mentioned China too, because it's also somewhat related to animal farming. That you could also say that you know Maoism is a similar type of the like most authoritarian type of communism possible, just like Stalinism, which you could argue is also being criticized in Animal Farm.
Yeah, because the current China is post-Maoism. It's
Yeah, yeah,
CJPism or whatever the hell you want to call it,
yeah.
whatever it is
I
now.
I think like neither China nor Russia are communist now, but they're still authoritarian, just in different ways.
Well, there's definitely, I would say, Russia. There is still a heavy involvement with state-owned entities. Um, like a lot of the journalistic outlets are owned by the state. A lot of their energy is owned by the state. There's a lot of stuff still owned by the state and controlled by the state. I think those are probably the socialistic things you would have to point to when it comes to Russia and China, that the state still owns a lot of business, industry, and means of production.
Hmm.
So that is still the case, that they still have a heavy investment in those entities.
Hmm.
But it does seem that there are individuals who can operate outside the state and still make pretty large corporations. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
like we can't say that TikTok is owned by the state, but we can say that the state can subdue TikTok at their leisure if they needed to.
yeah. Yeah, it's a little different in that there can still be corporations and billionaires and people like that in Russia and China, but it's not especially in the case of China. I think that it's not the case that the government just literally owns everything. Like you were saying, there are still corporations.
Right. It's still that there are some Chinese corporations that can make money outside of the influence of the state. That's certainly true because we've seen it. Like TikTok got big mainly because of its overseas activities. Because TikTok in China is a totally different beast than what it is outside of China.
Is
They
it?
operate, yeah, because TikTok in China, um, they have a very strict censorship and rules regarding social media. So 99 of the percent of the stuff that we see on Western TikTok could not be allowed on Chinese TikTok.
Oh, okay.
Because
Yeah, that
most of
doesn't
it is just
surprise me.
like state educational goals and things like that. Like you're not gonna find like people going viral for doing pranks on TikTok in China.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah,
Um,
wasn't it Tristan Harris who was talking about that once on Joe Rogan's podcast, and how they have like they have it designed differently so that it promotes more positive things and less outrage or that sort of thing.
well, it promotes things that the Chinese government wants it to promote.
Right, right.
Because
Oh
their
yeah,
social
obviously like
media
you
is
can't
heavily
see.
censored.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean obviously like there have been plenty of examples. Not any I can think of off the top of my head, but I've definitely, you and I'm sure, have definitely heard of plenty of examples of people criticizing the Chinese government and then disappearing.
Well, disappearing, yeah. Like we've
And that
seen that
happens in
happen
Russia
with.
too, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Many of their activists end up going to jail for very dubious reasons.
Hmm.
But there's also, like, thinking about Russia in particular, um, and you know what happened recently, where there was the Wagner group went rogue and tried
Oh, that was
to
the
coup the
attempted
government.
coup.
Right.
Yeah.
That is crazy. The interesting thing about that is how we have institutional based stability versus what Russia has, which is their stability is based off of who holds power, not whether institutions work or not.
Yeah,
When there
yeah.
are power struggles like that, it just shows like the instability of the system that's being run there. That, oh yeah, there's this oligarch. Like the guy that was running the Wagner Group was definitely an oligarch,
Okay,
and he made most of his money based off of like state funding. So he wasn't like an independent capitalist making money hand or fist. Like his money was definitely based off of state funding.
okay.
In his case, he
Oh, yeah, that
state
does make the attempted coup very interesting. I didn't know that. Wow.
yeah. So his a lot of his money came from before he became the leader of a mercenary group. He was he offered catering services for the government.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of first how he got his start. And then during when this war was ramping up in Russia, he went and created his own military group by going into the prisons and doing recruiting from the prisons
Oh, wow. Okay.
and trading like freedom for mandatory um, military service under the Wagner Group.
Oh, okay.
So the Wagner Group wasn't sanctioned by Putin or by the Russian government for a number of reasons. And one of the main reasons is that if the Wagner Group did something particularly horrific, the Russian government could say, oh, they're not official, like they're not operating under the Russian government, so
Oh, okay.
we can't do much about it. And it's interesting too because the Wagner Group had a lot of like anti-Semitic members as well. And it's
They're
funny
not
that oh yeah,
they're not literally Nazis like that other like that Ukrainian battalion. I forget what they were called.
well Nazis are a particular ideology. I'm just saying that generally anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. They had a lot of members that were such. I just found it funny that one of Putin's fake reasons in invading Ukraine was, oh, we need to get rid of the Nazis. Yet I have this anti-Semitic based like mercenary group that I'm gonna send in there to get rid of these so-called Nazis. Yeah, we're gonna have Nazis fighting Nazis. That makes a whole lot of sense
remember
there.
remember also when one of his excuses for why he went to war was so Russia won't get canceled by wokeness like J.K. Rowling.
So stupid.
Yeah,
Oh man, I bet that is basically an appeal to like right wing culture warriors because
yeah,
he knows they would eat that shit right up,
yeah,
you know.
definitely. Yeah,
But yeah, it's yeah, both Russia and China are different beasts in their particular thing. You know, Russia, of course, isn't even on par with China as far
right,
as like global power.
right.
But because they have nukes, they have to be treated equally. Nukes will see that's what nukes does. The possession of nukes makes you treated equally amongst superpowers.
Yeah,
So you can't just
people
go to war with these
you'll
people.
get treated you'll get treated equally if you are dangerous and powerful enough.
Yeah, even though like you can't move. Well, I can't say they can't because the levers that Putin has to pull are much more dangerous than the levers that China has to pull in order to get their way.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
because China doesn't have nukes, right?
no, China definitely has nukes.
Oh, geez, I can't believe I didn't know that. Okay.
No, they got nukes.
Oh, geez, that's way worse.
Yeah, China is a nuclear superpower.
Okay.
There are a lot of nuclear powers, but China is a nuclear superpower. I wouldn't consider Russia a superpower. There are nuclear
What's
powers, not
the
a superpower.
what's the difference? Like the number of nukes they have?
Of what makes you a superpower?
Yeah, in comparison to a nuclear power.
I believe it's your GDP,
Okay.
your economic footprint.
Okay.
No, Russia doesn't have a huge economic footprint. I think California on its own has a bigger GDP than Russia does.
Yeah, they have a pretty small military if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, they have a small military, but you don't really need a huge military if you have nukes.
No. No.
Like we have a
Well,
different
yeah,
philosophy, I guess, over here.
that's one of the many reasons why America doesn't need such a fucking massive military because like, you guys have more nukes than anyone else. Also,
Even though we still do have a massive military budget.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Um,
that
but yeah,
that reminds me actually of a little bit of another aspect of the book because in Animal Farm, I think it's Napoleon at one point who gets basically he hires some of the animals as his thugs to go and beat people up if they question him too much, which obviously happened in Stalinist Russia and Maoist China as well.
yeah, he uses physical intimidation to put down political dissent.
Hmm.
That's definitely a thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that obviously has happened with all of the examples we've used before. And I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily happening right now in Russia and China, though. But yeah, that is definitely a very clear allegorical example in the book because it reflects history.
Right, right. But yeah, the times in which this book were written, the countries in which he's particularly pointing at are very different monsters today than they were from back then.
Oh yeah, certainly.
I believe the countries, and we're assuming he's talking about, China and Russia.
Yeah, and obviously
And
this was during the Cold War.
yeah, I think it was 1945 that this.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to double check the publishing date, but I think you're right.
So it was like at the end of World War II, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, it is 1945. Yeah, right around the end of World War II.
So I'm thinking this probably was post the, I guess post the European victory, at least. So this happened after the Allies won in Europe. I think the Pacific was still going on by this time, like the war in the Pacific.
Was
And to
it?
be honest, well, the European leg of World War II ended before the European leg of the war.
Okay.
Or after, I meant. I'm sorry. The war with the Japanese continued after the European front had been won.
Okay. So that
And I
was.
think, and you have
It
to remember
says
too
here.
that Russia was part of the Allies during the Russian
Yeah, yeah.
during that time. So
And they switched sides in World War II. That was like making the deal with Stalin having Russia be part of the Allies was the deal with the devil to kill Hitler, basically.
Well, look at much damage the Russians had to go through to deal with Hitler.
The Russians definitely played a massive part in why the Allies won World War II. I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely deserve the props for that. I think, hey, if they want to celebrate that in their traditions, I think their May Day celebrations definitely have a legacy of fighting Nazism, and then that's, I think, another reason why Putin brought up Nazism in his reasons to go to war with Ukraine is because it's kind of a historical legacy of success when it comes to fighting Nazism.
Yeah, certainly.
And he wants to pivot that success into being morally correct about his reasons for going to war against Ukraine.
Yeah, stupid. That's what some people say who fully support the war in Ukraine. We're going there to fight the Nazis because all the Ukrainian army are the Nazi or is it the Azov? Yeah, they're all just the Azov Nazi battalion, bro.
Yeah. No. Regardless, it's an invasion.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think you and I probably agree that as with anything even vaguely political nowadays, people get way too extreme on either sides of the spectrum. They're like super, super, super pro-war with Ukraine and super anti-war with Ukraine people and everything in between.
I think that's all pretty good debate about the war in Ukraine. And I think it was actually a Tim Pool show. I was watching the debate between Emma Vigeland and Tim Pool.
Oh yeah, I was watching. I think I was watching that same part where she asked him about he was like scolding her for supporting America funding weapons for Ukraine, and she was trying to catch him in this contradiction because he wouldn't say that he doesn't support selling weapons to Israel to use against Palestinians.
Right. I think the meat of the argument, though, that I thought that she was right was with when it comes to treaty negotiations. Tim Pool didn't care whether we kept our word or not.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that part I agree. That was a stupid argument that he had.
Like his is like, oh, I don't care. I think they probably should have went down the consequences. What would happen if one doesn't care about keeping their promises?
Yeah.
Like imagine you're running a business and everybody knows you don't keep your promises. Imagine how successful that business is going to be. I know there's Trump, but Trump, I don't think is even that successful of a businessman. I think it's hard to
Not
show he
really.
isn't.
It's gone bankrupt twice or so, isn't it?
I think it was 4 times.
4 times? Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, quite a few times.
Okay.
But yeah, you have to be able to keep your promises in order for you to be a credible person, for people to believe you. Like, if you're going to go on a negotiating table and you're known for not keeping promises, who's to believe whatever you offer at that negotiation is going to be legitimate? It's not a good tactic. And I thought Tim Pool was deeply dense when it came to that conversation.
Yep.
Like, oh, I don't care. I was like, well, great. Like, see what happens when you try to negotiate now and nobody's going to believe you because you went back on your word.
Yeah, that's not a fucking good thing, man. Like the Iran deal, for example, I wasn't an enormous fan of Obama, but that was one of few things he did that I think was very good.
Yeah, anything to avert, nuclear proliferation is, hey, I'm for it. I
Yeah,
want to have less nuclear weapons in the world.
me too. Yeah.
But
So
yeah, it's just like things like that. I don't even know why we're on this topic now. I completely forgot why
well, we
we
were comparing like the allegory to Stalinist Russia to, or we got onto a tangent of comparing it to modern day Russia and
oh,
China.
modern day Russia and China, yeah.
Yeah,
How it's so much different, how it has
yeah,
evolved.
yeah,
Because it's
exactly.
interesting too, because when this book was written, the only nuclear power was the United States.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense because yeah, they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's the
What
same
was
year this was written,
August?
I think.
Well, when was this published? What's the month that this was published?
Let me
If it
see.
was
I had that
for
up
August
posted.
of 45, then it was definitely before a nuclear
Yeah,
power existed.
August 17th, 1945.
I'm thinking that when it had been written, like actually written, the first drop, the bomb had not been dropped.
That might be true. Yeah.
As the first bomb was dropped on August 6th, ask me how I know.
How do you know? I definitely didn't remember that.
I know this because my birthday is on August 6th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, August 6th is when the Hiroshima bomb was dropped.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
even know when the Nagasaki
Yeah, that's I
bomb was.
mean, yeah, it probably is almost guaranteed to be true that the book was published before the bomb was dropped.
Well, it sounds like the book was published after, but the story was likely completed before they dropped.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I meant. The book was written before the bomb dropped. Yeah,
So there were no nuclear powers as this book was conceived. And I
yeah,
believe the acquisition of nuclear power has totally changed the power dynamic um, in this case. But even then, um, before the Soviet Union collapsed, they were a nuclear power. So
yeah,
we did get to see what happens when a professed communist state contains nukes. And I guess one of the few, like, I don't consider Russia and China communist states. However, we do have North Korea,
yeah,
and their version of socialism is much closer to old school communism than the current
yeah,
iterations from China and
yeah,
Russia.
yeah. That does seem much more like Stalin or Mao, what Kim Jong Un is doing. Yeah,
And of course, they are very poor. They're economically isolated. And the only thing they really have on their side is you have to see that their only power is to threaten nuclear disaster to somebody.
yeah,
Like they cannot pull any other levers besides that to negotiate. There's no economic levers that they can use. Um, and there's no direct military levers other than threatening a nuclear missile launch.
yeah,
Um,
yep,
and
yeah. They don't have much of a
it's
military.
yeah, as far as like the size and things go, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not including the nukes, of course. Yeah,
right. The nukes are the only thing that put them on equal footing with everybody else, is that they can threaten a nuclear holocaust on somebody. And we've seen Putin do this, threatening nuclear holocaust.
certainly.
I think I don't think they've been heated exactly, but I do think the U.S. and other allies supporting Ukraine have been very careful and not trying to provoke Russia too much, even though Russia will fuck with drones and things like that. Like the only thing that happens is Russia gets a stern talking to, nothing else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes sense. You got to be fucking careful, obviously, right?
Yeah, the only ones who are given a pass are the Ukrainians themselves. Like they can do whatever the hell they want because they're the ones actively engaged with the war. But
Hmm.
uh, everybody else has to keep their distance.
Yeah,
We can
yeah,
provide
for sure.
aid, but we can't be completely involved directly by, you know,
Hmm.
trying not to escalate this into nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, I mean that's another reason you have to be so careful too. That's one of the reasons I don't even like the idea of selling weapons to Ukraine to use against Russia because it could provoke. It's one of many things that could potentially provoke war. But I mean, just in general too, because I don't like to support wars. But I mean, that's still better than the alternative, which is all-out war for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think mainly the threat, the gist of the war is Ukraine disarmed themselves of all their nukes, and the U.S. promised that they would help protect them because of that decision they made.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Well, yeah, I guess it makes more sense to help them in that way then. What did they
Yeah,
say in
so
terms of help though? Did that include, does that specific, is that specifically supposed to include weapons?
um, yeah, I believe so. I think
Okay.
aid, monetary and aid, but not direct, That's why he can call on the US for these things, because there's an agreement said because the US asked Ukraine to denuclearize and they did it.
Okay.
So there's kind of this obligation from the US to provide assistance because Ukraine followed through with that. It's really important that they stay in this agreement because what if the US asks some other state to denuclearize? And then they just point to Ukraine and say, hey, you made them get rid of their nukes and look at where they're at now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
All right, so there's definitely some obligations that have to be followed. I think just the overall goal of trying to denuclearize kind of is a very important goal to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. Yeah.
Which would include us having to spend a little bit, like 2% of our military budget to support Ukraine, which is not a whole lot,
Yeah,
So there was
that's
this one conservative on Facebook, uh, like, oh look, Ukraine just got $200 billion in military aid. It's like, how dare they use my taxpayer money? Blah 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 blah. It's like I told the guy, well, $200 billion. If you divide that amount amongst every American, that's $2 per person. So that's about how much you contributed to this particular endeavor.
it's like
It seems like a
six
lot of
inches.
money when you think of the bulk of it, but when you try to think of it as a tax from every individual, it's not that much.
Yeah, it definitely depends on how you quantify it. Like, I don't know, $2. What's that going to cover? Like 6 inches of the surface of a missile?
I don't know. $2 is like can't even buy you a Starbucks coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you're worried about, like a $2. Like I understand it being a non-consensual decision that your tax money is being used for that, but then you have to complain about everything. that your
Mhm.
tax money is not being used for.
Yeah,
But oh well. Yeah, well, I think this coup attempt just kind of shows the fragility of Putin's hold on power.
certainly.
I would really suggest for you to check on an episode of The Daily, which gets into more detail about this. I can only cover as much as I can remember, but it's a very nuanced situation. Like, when you think of Putin, you wouldn't think of him making concessions,
No.
especially with somebody who tried to overthrow his government. Um, but he's in such a weakened state that he has to make these concessions because there's all these other oligarchs who can do similar things to this guy that tried to do a coup on him.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you see that sort of thing like in that sort of dynamic in the book Animal Farm and all of the comparative historical examples we were talking about too, like uh, Stalinism and Maoism. When there's this is what happens with the overthrow of the farmer at the start of the book, and with the communist revolution, you overthrow the rulers, and then there's a power vacuum, and you think the ruling is going to be different, but part of it is that there's the burden of rulership, and people don't understand how difficult it is to run a society until they start doing it themselves. But then, they get corrupted, and the society just gets run like an oligarchy by another oligarch. Which, that might be the next thing that might be the next leader of Russia if Putin gets replaced by someone else, perhaps too. Even.
Yeah, and it's going to be a cycle of guardrailless transitions of power. Because when those guardrails aren't there, you don't know what's going to happen with the transition. I know in the case of the United States, those guardrails were really battered upon in the 2020 election. They held, however, there's still a lot of people that don't have faith in some of these institutions.
Yeah.
We're going to see how that plays out in the future. But I do think those guardrails are necessary to have some type of healthy transfer of power and to contain the power once it's in power.
Hmm.
Russia doesn't have these guardrails at all. It's just kind of there's Putin and then all of these different oligarchs in his orbit.
Yeah. Yeah, that
And
makes
I
me
think,
think about how like the January something like January 6th might have been like way more successful if that sort of thing was tried in Russia than the US. But I don't know though. Maybe in Russia, like at the seat of actual government itself, there's more protection there because it's more of a dictatorship. I don't know.
yeah, I think it would have been less in Russia. I think the reason why this coup was possible is because these oligarchs are also powerful. It just so happens that this particular oligarch had his own private army.
Hmm.
And once he had his own private army, he can make criticisms and demands. I know he was talking shit about like the Russian state, like the state army and how they're run pretty crappily and et cetera, et cetera. And just him being able to criticize that openly without reprimand meant that people were seeing as Putin was not as powerful as they thought he was. Because normally you would think if someone is speaking out against like the Russian government, they would get dealt with quickly.
Certainly, yeah.
In the case with the guy that was running the Wagner group, even now, it had been very difficult for Putin to criticize this guy. Um, which is kind of crazy. It just kind of shows that Putin isn't as all powerful as we were all to believe, and that there are
That's
definitely cracks within his organization.
say that's probably a good thing overall.
Yeah, I know from what was reported, they say that U.S. intelligence knew about the coup and didn't announce it or even comment on it because they
Really?
didn't want to be they didn't want to be blamed for starting the coup.
Hmm.
Because they thought that they kind of talked about it before it was happening. Putin would immediately try to blame the U.S. for the coup, but they just stayed quiet.
So is that's true as far as you know then?
As far as I know, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, it's been true. I'll have to go downstairs for a delivery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you might have to talk for a little while.
Okay. The Well, were there or were there any particular aspects of the book that you thought were really interesting that I could give my thoughts on while you go do that? Oh, he already
Um,
went. Oh, okay.
as far as like the books go, I guess like the
Yeah.
how the class system worked in the book versus how they have the different animal classes and things like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's true. There is that caste system that that happens in the book where the pigs are at the top of the hierarchy. I forget how how the rest of it goes, but you know the horses are laborers, like as we mentioned that one before, who got taken away and it was doing a lot of the labor. And it's interesting that a lot of the animals are very anthropomorphized and like to the point that they can use weapons when there's a civil war during the book, which that if you relate that to a historical example, and you're talking about the Russian Revolution, that's why there were multiple Russian revolutions, because there were warring factions with each that were against each other, which is why there are different types of communism. And yeah, the caste system is really interesting, especially because in the book, it and you show they show George Orwell shows the corruption of power by having the pigs, like we were saying earlier, basically become just as evil and corrupt as the human farmer was, Mrs. Jones, or Mr. Jones, I think rather, who they overthrew. And the pigs are, you know, brewing alcohol just for themselves, and they're making these deals with the humans and making money, and they're at the top of the hierarchy. And then eventually, all of these other animals get none of the benefits, and the pigs get all of the benefits. So it's it's interesting too, because they also all sorts of other little things happen which you can compare to real examples of Stalinist communism and Maoism too, and any modern day examples too. Even if you look at China or Russia today, like we were talking about, you can look at examples of just pointless products or pointless projects that get done just to give people work, but it's destined to fail, just so the benefits can go to the people at the top of the hierarchy and the workers don't get any benefits, which is actually ironically itself a communist critique of capitalism, which is why the problem is authoritarianism, obviously. But you know, there's that part in the book Animal Farm when I think this is after Napoleon and Snowball, who were the two competing leaders, after they had argued with each other about whether they should build a windmill, and they decide not to, because if I remember correctly, Snowball convinced everyone to not build it. And then after Napoleon and the people loyal to him overthrow uh, overthrow Snowball and take him away to get killed or exiled or whatever, then the windmill project gets worked on at that point, if I remember correctly, and so it eventually gets built, but it doesn't work very well, and all of the benefits from the work go to Napoleon and the other pigs, like I said, and then none of the other animals get any benefits at all. So that's just a byproduct of authoritarianism specifically, I would say, whether you're talking about communism or capitalism. That sort of trend starts to happen in Animal Farm and in those historical examples in Stalinist Russia and Maoist China, and like we were saying before, in completely different but still nonetheless authoritarian ways in modern day China and Russia.
Yes, so I am back.
Okay.
I will say this. I hate when people in political discourse point to Animal Farm or 1984 as a hypothetical scenario in which something happens and the result will be either one of those two things. Like, can't you use a real, actual historical example instead of some piece of fiction?
Oh, you mean like how people call everything they don't like Orwellian, basically?
Right. There's real worse examples, like North
Yeah.
Korea.
Yeah.
is
Certainly.
a far worse example, and it's probably
Definitely.
more relatable and easier to use than some
Yeah, I would
piece
say
of
so.
fiction. Like, I understand the piece of fiction is a critique, but it's not something to point to that will say this will happen.
No.
Use real world examples. It'll be far more believable. Oh, if you do this, you're gonna get 1984. It's like, yeah, no.
We haven't
I just
actually
hate those
seen
arguments.
1984 in the real world yet.
Probably won't.
Yeah.
Like even North Korea isn't really analogous to Big Brother.
They've like Big Brother seems way more powerful.
Right.
Like they have they're surveilling all of society pretty much at all times, or at least almost all of society, right?
Right. I would say North Korea is probably your closest analogy, but it's not really the same, in my opinion.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of key differences for sure.
Yeah, you can't say, oh yeah, Russia is 1984, China is 1984. I was like, no, not really. Yeah, so China has a social credit score or whatever. The funny thing is the U.S. does too. It's just called your credit score. It's a very similar function.
I think to be fair, what those people who talk about that say is they talk about the social credit system where it impacts your ability to get money or do banking or something if your reputation isn't liked enough, or if you haven't been charitable enough to the Chinese government.
I don't know. I don't know how widespread or how that's actually applied.
I don't either.
But yeah, there's nothing that will. Well, there's certain things that will stop you. Like, one, you're not going to get a government job if you said bad shit about America.
In China?
No, I'm saying in the U.S.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, but that is a little fucked up too, in my opinion. I think you should be allowed to criticize your government and still get a government job.
Well, at least you can if you need a clearance.
You can? Okay.
If your job needs a clearance and you have been publicly shitting on your country, um, and saying, "Oh yeah, they do things better in this other country," you might not get that clearance.
That sucks.
Yeah, but you have to remember, if someone needs a clearance, they're working with top secret and shit like that. So of course they're not going to let somebody that's shitting on the country view top secret documents
Oh,
or
yeah, I
be
get that.
even in the same room with them. Or
Okay.
critical systems. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be top secret documents. It could be something that is critical to national security,
Okay.
and which could be a huge swath of things, not
Yeah,
necessarily
people
having to
were
do with looking at a top secret document.
people were talking a lot about that when it was discovered that Trump had a whole bunch of classified FBI documents, and then we found out that Biden did too.
Right, but Biden turned his
Yeah.
without question. I'm not sure. Like the severity of Biden's documents didn't seem as bad as the one
Yeah, I
that
don't know.
Trump's had. Because I know Trump's dealt with like nuclear secrets and military stuff that were highly, highly like secret.
Yeah.
Um, the stuff that Biden had didn't report to have to do anything with defensive capabilities. So,
Okay.
uh, yeah, I think we're talking about like authoritarianism and social credit. Um,
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you have something similar in Canada. You guys have a credit score.
For yeah, of course. Well, credit rating, is that the same thing?
That probably is, but how many things does your credit rating actually affect?
Just only things that have to do with finance.
Okay, so yeah, it's a bit different here in the US.
Is it?
So yeah, like if you have a low credit score, and you want to get car insurance, but even you have a history of being an absolutely great driver, your insurance payments are going to be higher with somebody who's a shitty driver who has a absolutely great credit score.
Oh, I think that's probably the case. Also the case here in Canada.
Right. You know what I mean? So there are things that the credit score doesn't necessarily dictate that can affect, but they take the credit score as meaning, oh, you have bad credit, so you're probably a bad driver too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's stupid.
So there are other things like that with the credit score that do get affected. Even though they're not really that, like they might be linked in some type of study where it's more likely for somebody to both be a bad driver and have bad credit, but these institutions aren't treating people like individuals.
Yeah, that's a good
Like you
point.
could have
That
a
is really
wonderful,
stupid.
all right, so, and they can get away with that. I know there are states where they can't, like I know in California, you can't use a credit score to justify a higher insurance payment rate. But in my state, they can.
Really?
So yeah, so guess what? I pay a shit ton more insurance for my car, even though I'm not that bad of a driver. So in order to get a better credit score, I've recently um, opened a credit card just so I could get a credit score. I
Oh,
didn't
to
have a
improve your
credit score
credit
at all.
score. Oh, okay.
I didn't have one at all. I went from zero to having 650 credit score in like the span of a
Oh,
month.
well, well, that's awesome then, because you didn't have to start from a bad place. Yeah.
So I had no credit, and now I have what's called a fair credit score. but I need to try to build this up in order to pay less for things, which is kind of shitty because I don't want a
Oh, okay.
goddamn credit card, but if I want to pay less for stuff, I need to use a credit card for things.
Yeah, that's stupid.
Yeah, it is dumb. So yeah, I recently got a credit card. And I was like, okay, I'm only going to use this for restaurants since you get 2% cash back, and that's the only thing I'm going to use it for.
Okay.
So I go to a
Uh,
restaurant.
since we're since we're talking about credit and that sort of thing, to relate this back to Animal Farm, that's how, like, not just communist states, but certainly is a common aspect of communist states that they try to organize things financially according to what is apparently communism, although it's probably closer to authoritarianism than communism. And there are all these inefficiencies that happen in the market, and then it causes massive rises in inflation. And then, if you look at Stalinist Russia, for example, there are things like bread lines where people can't afford to buy food, so the government has to feed them and all that kind of shit.
Mm. Yeah, I know in the book they did go over some of these inefficiencies and about how the government isn't supposed to be the one to make these decisions. Because I know there was a point in which, when we talked about the actual work that they were doing on the farm, there was
Yeah,
a particular character that was kind of an expert in that. And as soon as that person started talking out about why they were doing things wrong, it seemed like that's when they started plotting to get rid of this character. And when they did, this it made like their economic system just totally fall flat
right.
because it got rid of the expert for political reasons, not because that was actually what was good a financial decision for them. It was only good because they didn't want them to speak truth to power. They just wanted to get rid of that truth to power.
Mhm.
And the trade off of that is being extremely inefficient.
Exactly. Yeah, well said.
And that's,
And there,
that could be both in communists or if you want to call it a capitalist system. If you have corporate capture of the ruling class, then there are definitely things that corporations can do to sway um, things in their favor.
oh yeah,
So
for sure.
it's
That's why then, yeah, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but that's why, you know, anarcho-capitalism is just as stupid as communism, but in the exact opposite direction.
yeah, it's just putting the power in the hands of the corporations, like without restriction, um,
Mhm.
which isn't. We always need a balance between what's good for the people versus what's good for the economy and
Yeah,
the sustenance of the machine that is a nation. There's always going to be
yeah,
trade-offs, and you always
yeah.
have to
That's why,
act accordingly depending on what the situation is. There's not
yeah,
always
yeah,
a
exactly.
one solution that's going to work into perpetuity. There's going to adjustments need to be made based off of the current situations that are happening.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And like that's why neither neither the government nor corporation should have absolute power, and it gets even more complicated because whether we're talking about the rules of markets or the rules of government, like you were saying, there isn't a one size fits all solution for every problem, and you have to kind of alter the degree to which the government has power and the degree to which corporations have power, depending on the situation and the relevant circumstances.
Yeah. Um, and the incentives, the
Yeah.
government incentivize the health of and well-being of the citizen.
Hmm.
That is not the incentive of a corporation. And their
Yeah.
incentive is to make as much money as possible. And
Exactly.
that doesn't always have the health and well-being of the citizen at its core philosophy. There are some companies that operate that way, but many, many, many do not operate that way.
Yeah,
and
like
those have, and they have to be kept in check.
worker co-ops. The only example I hear people like Ben Burgess and other socialists use for worker co-ops, I think it's called Mandragon
Right.
Madrigal. That's what it's called. I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna look that
Mm.
up. I mean, those sort of things, worker co-ops sound like a good idea to me, but like
They're not always, you know. It
it
really
seems like,
depends.
yeah, it probably depends on the co-op. And I mean, like I haven't, I've that's literally the only example I've heard of in the real world. It'd be
Yeah, because
interesting
I
to
think,
see what that experiment would actually result in.
right, and yeah, there's always the difficulty to differentiate um, risk versus non-risk, because we do know that the people who front capital for a business, those are the ones who are risking the most, which is their capital. And when they risk that capital, there's no knowing at the beginning of that risk whether what their endeavor is going to be a success or not.
Hmm.
And when it is a success, I do believe it is a little bit unfair for, you know, those who didn't have to risk themselves to be able to capitalize that in the same way as a person that did risk. But then again, you know, you also can't exploit your workers in such a fashion that it becomes ridiculously unfair.
Yeah, 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 like we're talking about, it's a balancing act, and there are trade-offs, and you want workers to be able to be treated fairly, but I mean, it also doesn't make sense to just take all the and taxation is a good idea too, but it's not as if they're, you shouldn't allow millionaires or billionaires to exist, and you should always just redistribute 90% of their wealth or something like that either.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing because I remember there was that podcast between Sam Cedar and that other guy. I forgot his name. It's the Valuetainment people. Do you know who I'm talking about?
uh
Patrick Bet Davis.
oh, okay, yeah, yeah, I've seen that guy before.
Yeah, so I think Sam Cedar was trying to say that billionaires shouldn't exist because all that means is the people who are billionaires are just hoarding money and they're not putting their money to good use. This doesn't
Yeah, I
necessarily
mean,
mean that that the government, like what he was trying to say, if you're continually starting new businesses and employing people and doing this and reinvesting your money in different places, that's fine. But if you're just hoarding and holding on to money for no purpose, then hey, if you're above this amount, you should be taxed a shitload of money because you're just hoarding money. You're not doing anything.
I I can see the appeal of taxing people a high percentage once they make above a certain dollar value amount, or something like that, for sure. I just
Yeah, that's all he
and
was
like
saying.
especially if people are doing that thing that everyone has heard of, with rich people, putting their money into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands or something like that, so they don't have to pay
Right.
taxes on their money, or they have lawyers to find them all sorts of legal loopholes so they don't have to pay taxes. Like if a lot of these people actually paid the taxes that they were supposed to, then that I suspect that would be at least make the problem a lot smaller.
Right. So I think what Cedar was trying to say is that he has no problem with businesses being ultra successful, generating a lot of capital. He just has a problem with that capital isn't being reinvested. So if it's
Yeah,
just somebody like sitting in a Scrooge McDuck vault full of coins and is nothing is being done with those coins. Like
Yeah,
you're just taking money out of circulation, and this money's not doing anything for anybody.
yeah.
So his
Especially, yeah, like
like
you
if
were
you
saying, especially if you're hoarding wealth, like you said, that money isn't doing anything for the market at all.
right, so that's kind of what his argument was. I know there was like a huge
Yeah.
backlash about that. I know Rogan was one, but I genuinely thought that Rogan didn't understand the argument.
Mm.
It's
I think he
not like
does
they're
that.
trying to.
I think he does that relatively often. I'm still a fan. I'm still a fan of his, but he's far too anti-woke sometimes, like instinctively so.
Yeah, I get it because he's kind of he's in a what comedy has kind of always been the I would say kind of at the forefront of the culture war, where you always have criticisms that can come from both sides. So, I get that, but also he has to be careful with some of the shit he says because some people
Yeah,
will
like that
just
example of
uncritically believe.
yeah, like that example of he was saying that there was a school that had litter boxes for children, and
Did
that turned out to be bull.
he fell for that shit?
Yeah, didn't you
Oh
remember there was
crap.
like a big controversy when he fell for
I
it?
remember I remember the controversy, but I didn't know he was one of the people that fell for that bullshit.
Yeah, he was.
Wow.
And then
Okay.
it's good that it's definitely good that he fact checks some stuff sometimes. But then he had like I have I haven't watched that episode with RFK Jr., but I'm planning on doing so. And I
I don't think I'm gonna watch it.
like vaccines
The
cause
guy sounds
autism
like
and
he's like I
vaccines cause
can't even
autism and
impersonate him.
what 5G gives you cancer.
Well, I can't impersonate RFK because I need to go stand in front of a fan blade and try to talk, but that's just I don't think that would be good for this podcast for me to put a fan in front of my voice and try to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
No, probably not. I'd have to hear more. I haven't heard much of his voice. I'd have to hear more of his voice to be able to do a good impression. It's kind of like
I don't think it's
it's
possible.
kind of like gravelly mixed with being high pitched at the same time simultaneously somehow.
I don't think it's possible without actual digital intervention or mechanical
Maybe,
intervention. It's like,
maybe.
like the autism vaccine. Like they can't do it, man. It's impossible. It's not possible to do it well.
I
I
can
don't think.
talk like Brett
I think
Weinstein
his
though and say
voice basically
this
I think
vaccine
his voice will
was
basically bar him from the presidency. There's no way anyone would. Well, there are people who take him seriously, but I don't think. I think people are vain. People need to have someone that's a good orator and doesn't sound weird. And he doesn't fit that. He doesn't fit that at all.
he reminds
Like
me
you
so
can't.
much of Alex Jones. He just spits all of these disconnected facts at you completely out of context in order to paint a completely inaccurate picture of reality that is totally the opposite of what most scientific evidence says.
Yeah, but Alex Jones is way more charismatic.
True. But
This guy just sounds
RFK
weird.
Jr. will say like, this study said, and this said this, and it'll be like all bullshit. But he'll cite studies and references and stuff, so people will not look up what he says, and they'll think he sounds smart. He must be right.
Yeah, I was before I was on getting onto the podcast. I was listening a little bit of Crystal and Kyle's Dr. Wilson from Debunk the Funk.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm gonna listen to that.
yeah, if you've heard the Debunk the Funk RFK episode, a lot of it is going to be like very similar stuff. Like very similar stuff is going to be talked about because
I haven't
he's
actually heard
actually
that yet. I was planning on listening to that soon as well.
okay because he's on to specifically debunk RFK's claims.
Good.
That's why he got invited to debunk RFK's claims about things. And I was like, yeah, he's being very scientisty about it. Because that's how scientists are. They don't give you certainty about things. You know,
Yeah.
and that's how scientists are supposed to be. So it's like, okay. But yeah,
Yeah.
RFK's voice is not going to win him an election. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that there's like a charisma bomb that just
Yeah.
nukes any charisma out of that he's ever had. It's just is that voice.
I don't think he's going to get elected anyway, because I think a lot of people who are perpetually online have this misconception of reality and think there's an enormous amount of people who are anti-vaxxers or vaccine hesitant, but most people still get vaccinated in like as every country that I've heard of, at least.
Yeah, I think most people on the left are pro-vaccine.
Yeah.
And I
A
think
lot of people, I think even most people on the right, perhaps, too.
I don't know. I would say there's maybe a 50-50 split on the right, but he's in the Democratic primary, so I think that's his views are going to kill him there.
Yeah, that's a good
The
point.
Democratic side.
I don't think the vaccine hesitant or anti-vax rhetoric will play well with the Democratic crowd.
Right. Like he has some things that I agree with. Like, yeah, big pharma certainly needs to account for certain things that they've done.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. But I don't think the vaccine was a terrible thing that happened.
No,
Um,
it wasn't like this miracle thing either, but it wasn't. It was overall a good thing. And
hey, he's just trying to say that the polio vaccine was bad. It's like,
yeah,
well,
that was so stupid.
what's wrong with you?
Fucking really
I think
stupid.
one of his more insane assertions is that what he said about AIDS and HIV.
Oh yeah, that there's no connection between HIV and AIDS, right?
Oh man, yeah, this guy's not a serious candidate. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. I just think he's so controversial that podcasts are allowing to have him on and talk because he knows when he appears, people are gonna watch to see what this loony asshole has to
Yeah, exactly.
say.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's I don't know how we got in the RFK territory, but
Yeah, me neither. I don't remember how we got onto that then. Well, I think we could probably end the chat here. So I think we
okay.
talked about basically the main parts of the book, and I wasn't expecting this, but I think it's good that we compared it to historical examples and you know Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, and then the modern day versions of them as well. I think that's interesting. And yeah, we talked
Yeah.
about more current stuff too, like the war in Russia and Ukraine. That's very pertinent right now. But yeah, it was fun talking about this book, and thanks for talking with me, man. Fun as always, and thanks to everyone for watching as always. And yeah, George Orwell's an awesome author. This is an awesome book. There's some very interesting aspects of authoritarianism throughout human history and today as well, and it's interesting to see how the dynamics shift. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I also everyone share this everywhere, share Mindgasms all over the place. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of the video. As always, check out my last video, which was a clip from my last video on Slavoj, the Lacanian / Hegelian / Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek's book called Less Than Nothing. And this is a clip in which he's talking about Kant's categorical imperative and the example of whether you should lie to a Nazi about hiding a Jew in your basement. So that's very interesting.
Wait. In order to talk about Slavoj Žižek, you have to do his voice.
Oh, should you lie to a Nazi about hiding a Jew in your basement?
Well, you forgot his phrase.
Huh?
You forgot his catchphrase.
You should lie to a Nazi about hiding Jew in your basement, even if Kant thinks you're morally inconsistent.
And so on and so on.
And so on and so on. Blah, blah, blah. And so on and so on.
That's his catchphrase.
Exactly. All right, yeah. So also, everyone, check out. I'm going to release another clip tomorrow morning about one of my I think my most recent video on the James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose's book, Cynical Theories. It's my video in which I'm criticizing them for saying that queer theory is literally Maoist and postmodernist, and it's a clip in which I'm basically criticizing their complete misunderstanding of the concepts of social construction and gender as a social construction. So check out that as well. And I think tomorrow I should probably be able to talk with you on your channel, Dusty, about Mad Max 3.
Yeah, that'd be great. I watched that on the plane ride. So I wasn't even planning. I was like, okay, I gotta watch this, and then boom, it's on the plane ride. So I got the commercial.
Oh yeah, you told me.
Which took like almost 4 hours.
Oh, is the TV version?
Well, not the TV edited version, but there were still like commercial breaks, so it took me a while to get through it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll be interested to talk about that because I thought it was phenomenally cheesy, and I definitely like the second one and the newest or the fourth one a lot more.
So you liked 2 and 4 more than 3. I have some tidbits about 3 that will make you think of, okay, I see why this is different.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that during the discussion.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks again. Again, always good, always fun to talk. And yeah, everyone watching, check out Dusty's channel, Woke Centrist, where we'll talk about Mad Max 3 tomorrow. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. And like I always say, most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and grooves in the heart. And George Orwell's work is awesome. All right. Anything else you want to say before we end it there, Dusty?
No, that's all. Smash that like and subscribe button as hard as you possibly can.
Yes.
Elbow drop it, smash it, kiss it, whatever the fuck you want. Yeah,
make love to it.
Yeah, do all that. Also, thing I'll have to note that I forgot to tell you about is that and I didn't know this, that live streams have less rules than a regular posted video.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So I had no clue that live stream rules are less stringent than posted content.
That's good.
So there you go.
Not as big of a deal that I swear so much, perhaps.
Well, not in the beginning, but since it's a live stream, there's a little bit of more leeway for people saying bad words.
That's good. Yeah, I've tried to cut down on that a little bit so I don't sound like I'm gratuitously swearing, but that's good to know that it's not an enormous deal.
Yeah, it's far less of a deal if you do it on live stream. But if you ever do like a pre-published vid that's not a live stream, you want to curtail all swearing of all types.
I should keep that in mind for when I'm getting Jenkins to make clips for me.
Yeah, so if Jenkins makes clips for you, make sure he bleeps out the bad words.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks, man. All right. Thanks again, man. And thanks again, everyone. And adios until next time.
All right. See ya.